Assalamualaikum and a good day I bid to all. My name is Dafina Binti Nadzri, student number 2024633252, and today I will be presenting a review on an industrial relations case of Omar bin Uthman versus Kulin Advanced Technology Sendirian Berhad. This company is previously known as KTPC Technology Sendirian Berhad, and this assignment is prepared for Professor Madya Dr. Shahnawi. So, firstly, let's begin with the fact of the case. To begin with, the appellant, Omar bin Uthman, was employed as the Chief Executive Officer or CEO at the respondent company, which at that time was known as KTPC Technology Sendirian Berhad. His contract covered a period from April 2011 to March 2013, a 2-year term, and was later extended. He earned a total monthly remuneration of 14,000 ringgit. However, on 23rd July 2013, Omar was terminated with immediate effect. The termination letter relied solely on Article 3 of the contract, which allowed the company to terminate by notice. But most importantly, there were no reasons such as poor performance, misconduct, or redundancy were mentioned in the letter. The employer paid 3 months' salary in lieu of notice, which came to about 42,000 ringgit before deductions. Initially, the case first went to the industrial court, which held that this was a case of termination simpliciter and ruled the dismissal unlawful. The termination simpliciter means a termination that relies only on a contractual notice clause without giving any factual reason. The employer was unsatisfied with this decision. They then sought judicial review from the High Court. The High Court then reversed the industrial court's decision, saying that it was not termination simpliciter because Omar had accepted the payment. The appellant later made an appeal, and the Court of Appeal allowed it, and they reinstate the industrial court's decision and set aside the High Court's ruling. So let's move on to the issues of the case. From this case, we can see there are several key legal issues that have arisen. Firstly, the lawfulness of termination simpliciter. Questions arise whether it is lawful for an employer to fire someone based on contractual clause and without giving any proper reason. Secondly, we must consider the law technicalities, especially whether accepting termination payment in lieu of notice means the employee agrees with the termination. Third, whether employers must always provide just cause and excuse, even if the contract allows early termination. And lastly, the scope of judicial review. Judicial review examines how a decision was made, not whether the decision was correct. So, was the High Court allowed to interfere with the Industrial Court's decision? Let's look at the judgment of the case. So the final decision came from the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal held that the Industrial Court's decision must stand. Furthermore, they ruled in favor of the appellant, Omar, and they confirmed that the High Court should not have interfered. Consequently, the High Court's order was overridden by the Court of Appeal. This just reaffirms that employers cannot rely solely on a contractual clause to dismiss any employees without justification. Next, let's analyze why the employer's action was wrong in this case. Firstly, termination simpliciter is not recognized in Malaysian industrial law. According to Nur Shamsida and Wan Zulkifli, termination simpliciter means termination by contractual notice or by salary in lieu without any reason. Under Section 20 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967, an employer must always provide just cause and excuse for dismissal. This means a valid and also a factual basis must be given, such as misconduct or performance issues. In this case, the employer failed to provide any reason at all to the appellant, and they are merely pointing to a clause in the contract. This makes the dismissal more unlawful. Next, the employer had misused the Employment Act 1955. Under Section 13(1) of the Employment Act 1955, a contract can be terminated by notice or by paying an indemnity. However, this section does not override Section 20 of the Industrial Relations Act, which protects employees from any unfair dismissals. So, even though the employer had paid 3 months' salary in lieu to the appellant, they still failed to prove a just cause or excuse for the termination. Moving on, the employer's third major mistake was filing a judicial review instead of an appeal. A judicial review is not the same as an appeal. According to Nur Azlina Abdulaziz and others, judicial review evaluates how a decision was made and not the judgment itself. Judicial review examines the process of decision making, whether the administrative bodies, such as in this case industrial court, followed the law, whereas an appeal examines the merits, whether the decision is right or wrong. So instead of using judicial review, the employer should have filed for an appeal under Section 33C1 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967, which states that anyone who is dissatisfied with an industrial court award may appeal to the High Court within 14 days. Let's move on to analysis and critique on reasons why the High Court's decision was redundant. The Court of Appeal found that the High Court had misused judicial review powers. The Industrial Court is already the primary tribunal for labor disputes and also labor relations. In Section 35 of the Industrial Relations Act requires them to act according to equity, good conscience, and substantial merits without relying on any strict legal technicalities. But in contrast, the High Court treated the case as if it was an appeal, which is beyond the scope of a judicial review. A judicial review should only look at whether the industrial court has acted lawfully upon making the decision and whether the court followed the correct process. It should not reevaluate the evidence or substitute its own judgment. Therefore, the High Court's intervention was unnecessary as according to the Court of Appeal, it was not an appeal process. The High Court, furthermore, has also misunderstood termination simpliciter. They overlooked the employer's obligation under Section 20 of the Industrial Relations Act. Simultaneously, this intervention only shows us that the High Court has failed to recognize Section 20 of the Industrial Relations Act. Another reason why the High Court's decision was redundant is that it relied heavily on common law technicalities. In this case, the concept of acquiescence. To define acquiescence simply, it means implied consent or agreement through silence or inaction. So, for example, if someone does not object to something, the law may interpret it as consent. So the High Court has interpreted uh, Omar's um, Omar's silence or inaction as consent. However, under Section 35 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967, the industrial court decisions are based on equity, good conscience, and the substantial merits of the case, without regards of technicalities and legal form. Therefore, relying on the employee's acceptance of payment in lieu of notice as consent goes against the industrial jurisdiction because industrial law aims to protect employees, especially in unfair dismissal claims. Therefore, applying common law technicalities, which is in this case acquiescence, is inappropriate under the Industrial Relations Act. To conclude this case review, there are three key takeaways that I would like to share. Firstly, the Industrial Relations Act 1967 is designed to protect workers and ensure fairness in the labor system. Secondly, termination simpliciter is not permitted under the Industrial Relations Act 1967. This means that employers cannot just simply dismiss employees without providing any valid reason. Third, a just cause and excuse is always required for any termination. This is regardless of what the employment contract has stated. So these are the references and the resources that have helped me in my case review. And with that, I have concluded my case review presentation. Thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for watching.